Hi guys, in today's video we're going to talk about the many causes of acid reflux. And in the next video we're going to talk about the things that you could do at home to treat each one of these. Let's get started. Absolutely one of the most common causes of reflux, and something that's very well established in the research, is the tone of the lower esophageal sphincter. So going back to our anatomy lesson, this is a sphincter, a band of muscle that goes around the very tail end of the esophagus and very beginning of the stomach. And ideally, if this is working under normal conditions, it will close that portal so that nothing can come back from the stomach up into the esophagus or vice versa. It only opens up when there's food coming down the esophagus. But in people with GERD, it's very common for this sphincter to have poor or low tone, which means that the sphincter does not close all the way, or it's more prone to opening part way throughout the day. Now, this in and of itself is not truly a root cause, right? Like something has to happen to compromise the integrity of this band of muscle. So we need to do our due diligence and think back a little bit further. Some of the things that can make that happen are nervous system health, believe it or not. This is just a band of muscle. Muscles get their commands from nerves, and those nerves have to come from somewhere. So looking at things that compromise nerve health, even things like vagus nerve stimulation can be really helpful here. But it is the vagus nerve and your overall brain and nervous system health that's really going to dictate how well this sphincter is going to open and shut and receive controls from the brain. So you can start to think of things like fish oil and antioxidants, just eating a whole food, plant-based, largely diet. There's a lot of things that we can think of for neuronal health, and specifically the vagus nerve. And I'll write vagus up here because that is the main source of innervation. There are also things like diabetes and poor blood sugar regulation. That will fry nerve endings. Just ask anybody who has neuropathy. Neuropathy, being secondary to type 2 diabetes particularly, is very common. And if you have diabetes or crappy blood sugar regulation, you can bet that you're going to have poor regulation of that lower esophageal sphincter. Likewise, obesity is an independent risk factor for reflux and GERD. And almost always, but not exclusively, obesity is associated with poor blood sugar regulation. So it may be that getting the metabolic syndrome and the obesity under control becomes a very important part of managing your reflux if you are overweight. Next up is the one that I think is the next most common, which is poor mucus lining health and integrity. And again, you can see that that was part of my original diagram. I drew the mucus lining surrounding the stomach and protecting it from the acid that's inside the stomach. Well, if this mucus lining starts to crap out and you don't have the ability to regenerate it and heal it and have that nice thick slime layer, you could bet your bottom dollar that you're going to be much more aware of the acid that you're carting around on a day-to-day basis. It's not necessarily that you have more acid, it's just that your coping mechanism for dealing with that acid has gone kaput. So low or poor mucus lining health is really a big cause of reflux for so many people. And guys, I'm going to sound like a broken record, but I'll say it again. Largely this is going to come from restricted eating. Particularly low fiber or low FODMAP diets are notorious for this. You need fiber and you need those building blocks of mucus that come from food and give food their viscous and fibrous qualities. Your body and your goblet cells that make mucus literally use fiber to build your mucus lining. So if you are depriving your microbiome, if you're depriving your goblet cells of the building blocks they need to make mucus and you have reflux, it's honestly not a surprise. Now the thing is, I'm not going to be the person on the internet who says, oh, just eat the FODMAPs and you're going to be good. I do understand that if you have IBS or SIBO or IBD, that might not be in the cards yet. But there are ways, I've got videos on it now, there are ways that you can reintroduce the FODMAPs for real, and get your mucus lining integrity back up and give your body the building blocks it needs to make mucus for you again. And that way you can have all the acid on planet Earth practically in your stomach and you're going to be completely unaware of it. That's how it should be. Next up is H. pylori or Helicobacter pylori infection. H. pylori is a bacteria that can live in the stomach, and it can cause gastroesophageal reflux, it can cause ulcers, so it can be quite inflammatory under the wrong circumstances. But what I will note here, and I could do a whole separate video, if you comment below, let me know if you want an H. pylori video specifically from me, but H. pylori is not as simple as we once thought it was. Back in the day, even as much as 10 years ago, we thought that if you found H. pylori, it automatically was a bad thing. And now we're starting to realize that H. pylori might be okay under certain situations. And really, the majority, I think 50 or 60% of the world's population does carry H. pylori in their stomach. The question is, do you have the type of H. pylori that has virulence factors and could be very aggressive? And do you have an overgrowth of it? So as an example, I frequently see this come up as positive on a GI map stool test. And what I look for is if it's out of the lab's reference range. If the lab has flagged it as high, or if it has a lot of the virulence genes, then I start to think more about treating it. But if it's just detected at a low level and it doesn't have virulence and somebody does not have signs or symptoms of reflux or any sort of gastric problems, then I tell them, hey, it's okay that this is detected, we're not going to treat it, but we'll keep an eye out for anything fishy. It doesn't seem to be bad under all circumstances. It is contextual, as is most other bacteria or every other bug in the microbiome. But I do find that a lot of people who have reflux do have H. pylori overt infections, and that needs to be dealt with in order to get their symptoms under control. Next up, let's get to the actual stomach acid itself. You'll notice that I didn't get to this until number 4 on the list, and that's because I think it's not as common of an issue as the other 3 tend to be. But low stomach acid does round out the top 4. Now, it seems counterintuitive. It seems like, wait, if I'm feeling acid burning and if I'm getting acid reflux, doesn't that mean there's an excess, like it's boiling over and it's coming out into the esophagus or it's charring the tissues? Why are you talking about low stomach acid? Well, I have some videos about hypochlorhydria and low stomach acid on my channel already, but for a really brief overview, what happens if you have low stomach acid is that your digestive capacity just stinks and you can't digest anything worth a damn. And what will happen, particularly with higher protein meals or larger meals, is that you eat food, you have this crappy dwindly amount of stomach acid, and it can't cope, and your stomach is not going to let go of the food until it's good and ready and it feels like it's adequately digested. So what's going to happen is that food is going to sit in your stomach and putrefy for much longer than it would otherwise. So it will delay your gastric emptying. So that is the connection, in my opinion, where low stomach acid can become relevant. The other thing that we have talked about in videos more specific to SIBO and IBS is that the pH of the stomach contents and the pH of the bolus of food that makes its way from the stomach into the small intestine will trigger a reflex whereby you get the release of digestive juices from the pancreas, which is hanging out over here, and the gallbladder. I don't know how to, there, that's a gallbladder. When the contents of the bolus of food from your stomach are acidic enough, that pH triggers a reflex and it tells the pancreas and it tells the gallbladder, hey guys, release your juices, we need to neutralize the stomach acid. So it also has far-reaching implications for your digestive system overall, because without this domino, without the adequate amount of acid, you're not going to get the next dominoes in the chain, and now you're compromising not only your ability to digest protein, but also carbohydrates and fat. So that is the bigger thing with stomach acid, is I think that it compromises your overall digestive capacity. I don't see low stomach acid cause overt acid reflux. I see it more cause like an indigestion or like a feeling like you ate your food and the food is just sitting in you like a brick of lead for too long because your stomach doesn't empty in a timely manner anymore. That's more what I would think of when it comes to low stomach acid, as opposed to these other 3 where you can feel like there's an overproduction of acid when in actuality there's not. Next on the list is inflammation of the gut lining and sometimes overt autoimmunity. Now it's important to differentiate. Everybody with inflammation does not have autoimmunity, but everybody with autoimmunity sure as heck has inflammation. Autoimmunity just means that the inflammation went one step further and your immune system is now going bananas and attacking your own tissue, your own cells, as opposed to attacking a bacteria or a virus or something that's supposed to attack. So for some people, just the inflammation, so like gastritis, would be gastric inflammation. That's all that word means. So if you have had a diagnosis of gastritis, you know that inflammation is a piece of this puzzle, and anti-inflammatory herbs can be a part of what you do to heal. I will also note, however, that basically every patient I've ever worked with gastritis, we had reason to believe that they had a really sucky mucus lining. And that becomes a key part in healing the gut, because if you have a weak mucus lining and erosion from the stomach acid continually charring and damaging your stomach lining, if you don't heal this first, there's almost no point to doing the anti-inflammatory and soothing herbs because you're just going to keep re-injuring the tissue. So these are not mutually exclusive. They tend to go together in more than one combination. But inflammation is still worth noting because anti-inflammatory herbs can go a long, long way. Now, the autoimmunity, there is a particular type of autoimmunity that I tend to talk about with my patients, and that is anti-parietal cell antibodies. That will, of note, cause low stomach acid. And I'll just put AI for autoimmunity, not artificial intelligence. For some people, their low stomach acid is secondary to autoimmunity because the parietal cells can become attacked, and those are the cells that make stomach acid for you. So the autoimmunity is inherently inflammatory. If you have autoimmunity in your stomach lining, you know that there's inflammation there, first of all. But you could also go back and start thinking about supporting stomach acid, because if you're destroying the tissue that makes that thing, you might want to support the thing. It's analogous to if you have somebody with type 1 diabetes and their tissue is no longer able to make adequate amounts of insulin, then it could be really profoundly beneficial for that person to start taking insulin from an exogenous source. Next on my list is hormones, and if you talk to any woman who's ever been pregnant, they will probably tell you that this is accurate. The hormones, particularly as they relate to pregnancy, although it does have overlap in day-to-day life, do very much affect the stomach in a couple of ways. A, they will tend to lower the tone of the lower esophageal sphincter. And again, if the tone is low or poor, more of the contents from the stomach can get up into the esophagus. So hormones directly will feed into a root cause, potentially for that low LES tone. Hormones are also used to heal the gut lining. If you don't have adequate levels of estrogen or thyroid hormone or progesterone or testosterone if you're a man, then you're going to be hard-pressed to heal the lining. And that can overlap strongly with either the stomach acid thing and possibly the inflammation and autoimmunity that we just talked about. So knowing that that is a factor is also very important. And then finally, hormones do have a role in motility. And again, if you don't have adequate gastric emptying, if you're not getting the contents of your stomach out, processed and then out of the stomach in a timely manner, then they're going to sit and it's going to feel like you have a brick of lead in your stomach, and they're going to hang around and putrefy for longer than you want them to. So hormones can be really important. Now, I have another shtick that goes with this. Managing hormones goes beyond just measuring the hormone. The biggest thing that I would tell you is that if you have symptoms of wacky hormones, that it's worth paying attention to. So for women, if your cycle is irregular, if it's particularly heavy, if you get a lot of cramps and breast tenderness, or if you have anything like fibroids or endometriosis, those are things that you really want to start paying attention to and managing from a holistic perspective. For men, if you have symptoms of low testosterone, they can mimic anemia in men. So if you think you're anemic, get your testosterone checked, both the total and the free component of that. And you can start thinking of things like low libido, difficulty achieving an erection, just overall fatigue and blah and brain fog. I remember one of my patients who was getting shots for low testosterone prior to working with me. He used to say that it was like his spidey sense came back on, that the day he got his testosterone shot, he just felt alive again, and like the lights in the room were brighter and he could live his life. So if you feel like you're just kind of dull and blah, it might be worth looking at your testosterone levels and seeing if you aren't a little bit low. But the thing is, in conventional medicine, they talk about measuring the hormones, and they will. They'll measure your estrogen, they'll measure your testosterone. But what does not get as much research and does not get as much attention in the conventional medicine community is that just having an adequate amount of the thing does not guarantee that the thing will do its job. So you could have the right amount of estrogen per blood work or a urine sample or whatever, but there's no guarantee that that estrogen is going to go cruise over to your cells, dock on a receptor, do the things with the receptor that it needs to do, and then change gene transcription on a cellular level. There can be resistance to hormones. Just ask insulin. Insulin is a hormone. So if you start thinking, oh, I have hormone problems, I'm going to get it measured, and then it comes back looking on paper like you're fine, it may still be that you need to tackle the hormones, but from a different angle. If that is the case, you might choose to tackle it more from the inflammatory stance, because the ability for hormones to do their job and dock to the receptor and do all the transcription things with the genes, That has a lot to do with inflammation and also toxicity, which I don't really have time to go into in this particular video. But start looking at things like endocrine disrupting hormones, or I'm sorry, endocrine disrupting substances like phthalates and PCBs and bisphenol A and plastics. Start thinking about that and address the hormones in a holistic way if you feel that that is a piece of your puzzle. And finally, we get to my personal favorite pet, which is small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, SIBO. Now, I have other videos entirely on this, and I talk about it more in those videos, but the gist of it is, if you have bacterial overgrowth or bacterial dysbiosis in your small intestine, that will make a lot of gas and cause a lot of bloating. And while you can get bloating that goes outward and push out and make you look pregnant, it can also push up. And pushing up on that inferior border, that bottom border of the stomach, and pressing it up against the diaphragm, this meaty wall that it can't go past, will cause irritation to the nerves and inflammation, and it will cause pressure that feels just really yuck and gross. And it can muck with some of these other things like inflammation and your mucus lining. So SIBO in and of itself can be a cause of reflux in some people. I don't think it's the most common cause as a singular entity, but I do think it's worth noting, particularly if you have a diagnosis of IBS or IBD, since there is a very high incidence of SIBO in those populations. And finally, last but not least, let's talk about hiatal hernias. This is number 8. And I only put it at the bottom of this list because it's going to ruin my picture to draw this, but let's go ahead and draw this and talk about what a hiatal hernia actually is. So for this picture, I've drawn the diaphragm, which is this blue dome. And it's much bigger than this, but what I wanted to depict is that the diaphragm separates your thorax, which is the section of your body where the heart and the lungs reside, versus the abdominal cavity, which is where your stomach and intestines are. And the diaphragm separates the two. The esophagus has to make its way past the diaphragm somehow. Otherwise, where would your food go? So the esophagus goes through a hole in the diaphragm that should be perfectly sized. That's the thing. It's a Goldilocks complex. You don't want it to be too small, or else you're going to feel like there's a stricture or some sort of bottleneck situation. And you don't want it to be too big, because here's what can happen. If that hole becomes too lax or loose or too big, part of the stomach will go up into the thoracic cavity and poke through that hole. And you get this situation where now you've got a part of the stomach that's mushed its way up into the thorax, out of the abdominal cavity, and it's getting pinched. It's gonna be pretty uncomfortable to have that there. This could be a cause for reflux and also other symptoms that wouldn't necessarily go with H. pylori or poor mucus or any of these other things. For example, breathing problems or symptoms that are provoked when you take a deep breath, or a feeling of pressure in the chest. Things like that might start tipping you off that a hiatal hernia could be on the. And finally, let's not forget histamine intolerance. If you have histamine intolerance, one of your symptoms may be a feeling of acid or a feeling of reflux. And here's why. These cells that we talked about very briefly that produce stomach acid for you are regulated in part by histamine. And that's why things like Zantac help with the acid reflux feeling, because they are H2 histamine receptor blockers. So histamine intolerance, if you're thinking, oh my God, do I need to do the low histamine diet? How do I know if this is a thing? Here's what I would say to you for starters, is there's a couple of things that I look for in my patients when I'm starting to think along the lines of histamine intolerance. And it can help you differentiate whether or not you need to think about this right now. So if you are a more phlegmy person, and I say that with all the love in the world, but if you are a mucus factory and you have postnasal drip and a stuffy nose and seasonal allergies, and if you have a strong history or a family history of seasonal allergies and food allergies and eczema and asthma and allergic stuff, if you fit that bill, or if you have a lot of rashes, like I mentioned eczema, but also hives, start thinking along the lines of histamine intolerance and an immune system that is overburdened with histamine or overproducing histamine. Now, it's worth noting too that for all that the treatment of histamine intolerance can be antihistamines and a low histamine diet, I'm not a fan of staying on that diet for a long period of time either. You can manage the inflammation, the hormones, the SIBO, the dysbiosis, the mucus lining. You can manage all of these pieces of the puzzle and more. Treat your body, balance your systems so that you're able to reintroduce histamine foods again. That can be done, and I help a lot of my patients with that. But for right now, if you're trying to figure out what the cause of your reflux is and you're in the mode of just needing answers, then I would say start writing down the foods that you eat and keeping a symptom diary, or if you have one already, great, and look back at that and see, okay, I got reflux on Tuesday night. What did we have for dinner? Oh, spaghetti sauce. Tomatoes are high histamine. Okay, the next day I had reflux after lunch. What did I have for lunch? Strawberry banana smoothie. Son of a gun. So you can start to piece this together and figure out, are you a person who fits the bill for a more allergic, histaminic, phlegmy profile, first of all? And if you do, or if you have a lot of rashes or a lot of these symptoms, then start really evaluating this more. And a temporary reduction in those high histamine foods can really, really be helpful in the name of figuring out your reflux, getting some symptom relief, and then you can worry about adding in those histamine foods a little bit later down the road. So, executive summary time. You can see there are a lot of causes for reflux. This is why there's no one cure-all. The conventional medical doctors might tell you that everybody just needs to be put on Nexium, and that is just not the truth. There are so many layers to the equation when we're talking about reflux and GERD, and treating it in a holistic perspective and looking at your whole body and looking at the factors like the mucus lining and the stomach acid and the tone of your sphincters and the nervous system. This can be so important for actually healing your GERD once and for all. And if you're sitting there and you're like, oh my God, this is way too overwhelming, this was a huge video, I know, but there are other ways I can help you. If you look in the description of the doobly-doo below, I do appointments with people outside of the state of North Carolina. I don't think I've ever actually mentioned that in a video, which I don't know why I've never mentioned that, but I do work with people in other parts of the country and even other parts of the world. So if you'd like to do one-on-one appointments with me, that is an option, and I'll put the link down below. But also, I am so excited to launch FODMAP Freedom in 90 Days, my online course. And I am just so pumped to help people get off of the restrictive eating patterns that they've been on, like low FODMAP and SCD, so that they can have a healthy mucus lining and they can actually function again and enjoy their food. So if you have IBS or SIBO or IBD and you're stuck on the low FODMAP diet or SCD and you want to reintroduce these foods safely and effectively and without symptoms, and you're thinking about things like managing your mucus lining and managing your GERD, I would be so honored to help you in that course. And there will be a supportive community of other people who are going through the same crap that you are, and we're going to heal together. It's going to be really great. There is a link in the doobly-doo also below if you would like more information about that course. Hey guys, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, click the like button, and leave a comment down below with the videos that you would like to see me do next. Doing all of those really helps support the channel and support my efforts in making as many videos as possible for you guys. Thanks so much, and I'll see you in the next video.